Welcome to the deep dive. We dig through the sources so you get the key insights fast. Today, we're tackling something that sounds simple, but really isn't. What's the link between a Navy's power and, well, its trees?
It's a fascinating question, and for centuries, the answer was basically everything. Timber availability wasn't just, part of the equation for naval power. It dictated it. It fueled wars, shaped colonial moves.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we're getting into the hidden history of wood. We've looked at naval histories, economic studies from the medieval period, loads of stuff. Our mission, to see how this one natural resource really shaped global power, how nations dealt with each other, even how ships were designed.
Right. It's kind of mind-bending when you think about it.
Yeah. Have you, the listener, ever considered that settling whole colonies or even kicking off major wars could actually trace back to needing certain kinds of wood?
It seems unlikely on the surface, but the history shows it was a massive driver. For maritime nations especially, getting timber for navies. That was pure national security. Think about England. Their constant need for timber literally pushed them to settle places like Canada and New England.
Okay, so let's maybe start further back. Timber in just everyday life, early industry, say medieval Western Europe,
Yeah.
you picture those like classic fantasy villages. Timber frames, wattle and daub walls.
Yeah, that wasn't fantasy at all. That was reality. Though, interestingly, those peasant houses, usually owned by the local lord, not the peasants themselves.
Huh. So wood was everywhere, but also tightly controlled.
Absolutely. Lords saw forests as private property. Sometimes they'd even shrink villages to make more forest. Peasants needed permission, actual permission to cut down trees. Shows you how valuable it was.
So even though farmland was key for food.
Right. Food first, obviously. But if
Yeah.
you had extra food, you could trade it for lumber. It all connects.
And wood wasn't just for building houses or fences. It was critical for early industry too, right? Metalworking.
Oh, completely indispensable. Blacksmiths needed tons of timber, specifically to make charcoal.
Why charcoal? Couldn't they just burn wood?
Regular wood just doesn't burn hot enough to work iron properly. Charcoal does. But making it required huge amounts of wood. This led to, well, pretty massive deforestation in parts of Europe just for charcoal.
It's wild to think about that scale.
It is. And, it's not entirely history. Village-level charcoal making, still important in places like Southeast Asia, Haiti, today.
Wow. Okay, slight tangent, but you mentioned the linguistic tidbit.
Yeah, just a fun one. The word nickel comes from an old German word for a sort of malicious demon.
No way.
Yeah, it's related to Old Nick for the devil. So nickel was originally seen as troublesome ore.
Ah, okay, back to the wood. So they've cut these massive trees. How on earth did they move them? We're talking huge logs here.
Yeah, logistics were a nightmare. Main ways were literally dragging them, floating them down rivers if possible, or using these heavy-duty specialized carts.
Dragging them, like with animals.
Exactly. Horses, oxen. Actually, that historical practice, it's the origin of modern pulling pony competitions.
Really? That's a direct line.
Yep. And the pulling power was immense. Estimates suggest a horse pulling logs could outperform like a 1 or 2 horsepower engine, just sheer animal strength.
Incredible. Were they managing the forests at all back then, or just clear cutting?
There were early forms of management, things like pollarding. You see it across the UK still.
Pollarding.
Yeah, you cut the top branches off a tree. It then sprouts lots of new, thinner shoots. Those shoots were perfect for baskets, furniture, weaving into those wattle and daub walls we talked about. It was a way to get a sustainable supply of smaller wood.
Okay, so wood is fundamental, but then there's a shift, right? It becomes a strategic national security issue.
Big shift. Moving into the, say, 18th and 19th centuries, timber becomes absolutely critical for naval power. It's something historians sometimes gloss over, this timber problem, but for England, France, Spain, Holland, it was top priority.
How serious are we talking?
Extremely. Louis XIV's minister, Colbert, he actually predicted France would perish for want of timber.
Perish. That's strong.
And it wasn't just talk. Lack of good, solid masts could make a whole squadron useless. Weak ships constantly hampered admirals. Even Nelson faced issues because of the state of his ship's timber.
So it wasn't just any wood they needed.
Not at all. Building the big warships, the ships of the line demanded really specific timber. Great timbers, they called them, large structural pieces, and compass timbers, naturally curved ones.
Curved ones. For the ship's frame.
Exactly, for the ribs and knees. Finding these specific shapes could hold up construction for months, even years. They'd literally send people out searching forests for one right-shaped tree.
Wow. So that limited how big they could even build the ships.
Pretty much. One source notes the Royal George of 1788 was only 12 feet longer than a ship from 70 years earlier, the Royal Sovereign. Why? Because nature itself, in some measure, fixes its limits. You could only build as big as the available trees.
And they got fixated on certain types of wood.
Oh, yeah. A stupid and conservative partiality, as one source puts it. They'd overuse their favorite woods until they ran out.
Like English oak.
English oak was prized, especially good sound Sussex oak. Better than Yorkshire oak, apparently. Italian oaks were good, too tough, naturally crooked shapes shipwrights loved.
What about wood from other places? The Baltic. America.
Baltic oak was useful, mostly for planks, but generally seen as straighter and maybe a bit weaker than English oak for the main structure. American oak, the Navy Board generally condemned it. Might have been prejudice, might have been issues with how it was seasoned, or maybe its actual properties for certain uses. It's complex.
And fur. You mentioned fur earlier.
Right, fur wasn't ideal for the main hull strength, but it was lighter. Excellent for masts and spars. And the French actually pioneered using it for faster, lighter frigate hulls back in 1757. So different woods, different jobs.
Okay, so finding the right wood was tough.
Yeah.
But then they had to deal with decay, right? Wood rots.
Constantly. A huge battle. You had external decay, first things like marine borers, the Teredo navalis, the sea worm.
Ugh.
Sounds nasty.
It was. Even oak, with its tannic acid, wasn't immune. These things could turn a solid hull into a leaky sieve, as they said.
And what do they do about it?
Early on, tar, layers of hair, and thin wood sheathing didn't work very well. The real breakthrough was copper sheathing, covering the hull below the waterline with copper plates. That came in generally during the American Revolution and finally stopped the worms.
Okay, so that's the outside. What about inside?
Internal decay. Dry rot. That's a fungus. It grows inside the timber, hidden away, and just eats away at the wood's strength.
Sounds insidious.
Very. And a huge factor was using unseasoned timber. Oak really needs about 3 years to season properly, to dry out slowly.
3 years. Did they have that kind of time?
Often, no. Stocks were low, demand was high, so they'd build with green, unseasoned wood, and that was disastrous. It decayed much faster, sometimes halving the ship's lifespan, which, of course,
Doubled the demand for timber all over again.
vicious cycle.
Exactly. They were fighting the enemy, the sea, and the very material their ships were made of.
So this desperate need leads to what you called the Great Timber Hunt. England's own oak supplies were running low.
Yeah, their ample heritage of oak was depleted. Royal policies, economic pressures, they became heavily reliant on private landowners' groves.
How did people grow oak back then? Was it farmed?
2 main ways. You had high woods, more like parks, ornamental. But more common for profit was coppice with standards.
Coppice was standard.
You'd cut down most smaller trees near the ground regularly. That's the coppice part for firewood, charcoal, small items. But you'd leave a few trees, the standards, to grow big and tall for major timber. And those crucial curved compass timbers, often found in oaks growing alone in hedgerows between fields where they could spread out.
But even with that, domestic supply wasn't enough.
Not for the Navy's needs, and they faced competition. The East India Company, for instance, their big merchant ships were basically warships, needed the same high-quality oak and often outbid the Navy.
So England had to look abroad.
Critically dependent, especially on the Baltic region for masts and spars, tall, straight pines and firs, England was, quote, at all times dependent on a foreign supply.
And that dependency shaped their foreign policy. You mentioned forcing their way in.
Absolutely. Protecting that Baltic timber supply was paramount. English fleets literally sailed into the Baltic, sometimes fighting, to keep those sea lanes open. They also actively worked to cut off timber supplies going to their enemies, like France.
And this caused friction.
Big time. This aggressive stance on controlling naval stores, including timber, was a direct cause of the armed neutrality of 1780. All those neutral Baltic countries banding together to protect their shipping rights, it was a major moment in international law.
So how did they actually get the timber out, especially if relations were tense or they were blockading ports?
It was incredibly complicated. Deals with Norway, Russia, Prussia, sometimes involving Secret Service money paid to French officials to basically smuggle timber out of hostile ports like Emden during blockades.
Wow, clandestine operations for wood.
Seriously. They used all sorts of tricks, pro forma documents, pretending cargo was something else. Huge convoys, hundreds of merchant ships escorted by warships trying to sneak timber through.
Did it always work?
No way! Loads of ships got captured. We're talking potentially hundreds in a single convoy sometimes. And if captured by the British, Admiralty judges like Lord Stowell often ruled the timber was contraband, war material. The captors got the proceeds. Big incentive.
So the Baltic was key. What about America?
Hugely important. The American colonies became the crucial source for masts, those massive single timbers needed for the biggest ships. Shipbuilding itself became a major colonial industry. By the American Revolution, something like a third of all ships on the British registry were built in America.
And the famous broad arrow. That fits in here.
That's it, the King's Mark. A broad arrow symbol stamped onto the best, tallest pine trees, reserving them specifically for the Royal Navy's masts.
How did the colonists feel about that, having their best trees marked off?
They hated it. Fierce opposition. They saw these laws as penal and too general, basically starving them from clearing land for farming or using the timber for their own trade.
So resistance. Illegal cutting.
Lots of it. Illicit cutting was common, and they even fought back in court. There's a famous case, Frost versus Leighton, where colonial courts actually ruled against the Crown's claim to timber. Judicial defiance.
And then the revolution itself must have hit the supply chain hard.
Immediately. Critical impact. Masts were seized by the revolutionaries right at the docks in places like Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The British faced sudden, severe shortages.
Okay, so we see the struggle for supply, the decay. What were the real-world consequences for the Navy in action? Did timber problems actually lose battles?
They certainly didn't help. Look at Admiral John Byron. They called him Foul-Weather Jack. His fleet sent to America got hammered by gales just weeks after arriving.
What happened?
Cracked mainmasts, lost bowsprits, rotten planks popping out. Ships were barely seaworthy. They'd patch masts, but the repairs often wouldn't hold under stress. Or think about the massive hurricane in the West Indies in 1780. Just devastated the fleets there.
How bad was it?
Dozens of ships dismantled. 8 just foundered, sank. 3 wrecked ashore. And crucially, they couldn't replace the lost masts. Ships were stuck inactive at Antigua for ages, waiting for spares from England.
And this connects to specific battles.
Directly. Admiral Graves at the Battle of the Chesapeake off Yorktown in 1781. A critical moment in the American Revolution. His fleet was in rough shape, sprung masts and leaky hulls. He actually refused to fully engage the French fleet, claiming his ships had not speed enough. That decision had enormous consequences for the war.
Wow. So the material state of the ships, due to timber issues, arguably influenced the outcome of the American Revolution.
It's a strong contributing factor, absolutely. Beyond storms and battles, though, there were problems back home, too. Bureaucracy, corruption.
Right, you mentioned the administration struggle.
Consistently. Annual reports always showed timber stocks were inadequate. Never enough reserves.
And corruption was part of that.
Oh, yeah. Some shocking examples. Charles Middleton, a key Navy administrator, his head clerk, Thomas Davies. His salary was £100 a year. Peanuts. But he was pulling in over £2,500 extra in fees and gratuities from timber contractors, called it customary. Basically bribes.
£2,500, that's huge money then.
Astronomical. And it wasn't just clerks. Peter Pett, a master shipwright at one of the Royal Dockyards, suspended because he set up a dummy contractor to sell his own timber to the Navy Yard he ran.
Selling timber to himself, essentially. Unbelievable.
It points to systemic issues, and over time, how timber was bought changed too. Went from small deals to competitive bids, and eventually in the 19th century, this powerful timber trust emerged.
A timber trust, like a cartel.
Pretty much. Sources say they bullied the Navy into a system of contracts for long terms at secret prices, locked them in.
And efforts to reform could backfire.
Massively. Lord St. Vincent, around 1801-1803, tried to clean house and cut costs. Well-intentioned, maybe, but his economy drive was disastrous. He slashed timber orders, alienated the contractors, and let reserves drop way below the safety level under 1 year's supply when they needed 3.
And this is while Napoleon was gearing up.
Exactly. Napoleon was building ships like mad. Meanwhile, St. Vincent's cuts left the Royal Navy scrambling. Nelson himself complained his fleet looked great on paper, but was actually unfit for service.
So decades, centuries even, of struggling with wood. What finally changed? Iron.
Iron. The shift was inevitable, but boy was it resisted. The attachment to wooden walls was incredibly strong.
How strong?
Amazingly strong. As late as 1860, 1861, you still had serious official support for building wooden warships.
Even after iron ships were clearly viable.
Oh, yes. The conservatism was remarkable. We've got quotes here. Captain Chads in 1849. Iron, very inferior to wood for warlike purposes.
Inferior, wow.
General Sir Howard Douglas, a respected authority, insisted in 1860, "The days of timber ships dot not nor ever will be over. Never."
They really believed wood was inherently better for warships.
Fundamentally, there's a famous line from a dockyard official: "Don't talk to me about ships of iron, it's contrary to nature."
Contrary to nature, it's like they couldn't conceive of it.
It really seems that way. And the momentum was huge. Parliament kept voting millions of pounds for new wooden warships well into the 1860s.
Why, if iron was proving itself?
Partly existing contracts with the timber suppliers, partly that deep-seated belief system, and maybe partly just institutional inertia. It took time for the reality to sink in.
Okay, that brings us pretty much to the end of the wooden era. What a journey. So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear that timber, this thing we barely think about, had this absolutely profound, often hidden impact on economies, industry, diplomacy, war, even corruption, for centuries.
It really did. It was the silent engine, or maybe the creaking frame, behind so much of global history for that period. This whole story just shows how these foundational resources, things that seem simple, can have these incredibly complex, far-reaching consequences, shapes the whole course of events in ways you just don't expect.
Yeah, it really makes you look at the world differently. Which leads to a final thought for you, our listener. Considering how totally dependent powerful nations once were on just one resource, like timber, what unseen dependencies do we have today? What materials, what systems are we relying on right now that might shape future conflicts or drive innovations in ways we haven't even begun to imagine? Something to think about. Until the next deep dive.